I said what I said, Peter. Don't twist my words to make yourself the victim here.
The victim? You think I'm playing victim right now?
So why have you been asking around about me for weeks? Behind my back!
Because something doesn't add up. And you know exactly what I'm talking about, so don't insult pretending you don't.
You don't get to interrogate me like this in public, and then act wounded when I push back.
Then just answer the question. And tell me the truth.
You want the truth? Fine! How about you go first? Welcome to Labari Haven, home of African stories that stay with you.
You just watch two people who love each other decide in the same breath not to tell one another the truth. If you already think you know which one of them is hiding the bigger secret, hold on to that guess, because I promise you, by the time this story is done, you'll change your mind at least twice. This is part 1 of a brand new series, and if you're new here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button, it genuinely helps this channel grow. Now, let me take you back to where all of this actually began, months before that dinner, before the lies had names, when this was simply the story of a man who was tired of himself. Peter Ajayi had a way of walking into a room that made people assume good things about him before he had said a single word. It was in the fit of his clothes, the unhurried way he shook hands, the manner in which he let a silence sit instead of rushing to fill it, the same way confident men do in every boardroom in every city in the world. At 34, he ran the logistics arm of a mid-sized shipping firm in Lagos, drove a car that made junior colleagues straighten their collars when he walked past, and had, more than once, been introduced at family functions as the one who has his life sorted. He had learned a long time ago exactly which part of himself to let people see. What they did not see was the trail behind him. 4 relationships in 6 years, each one ending the same way, with a woman finally understanding that whatever he had promised her in the dark had never once been meant to survive the morning. 2 pregnancies that never became children, both times because Peter had made it clear, without ever raising his voice, that a child was not a conversation he was prepared to have. A string of women who had loved him with the kind of hope that comes from believing a man's stability means he is also safe. Until they discovered that a man can be financially settled and still be homeless in every way that matters. He did not think of himself as cruel. That was the part he could never quite explain to himself in the aftermath of a breakup. He had never set out to hurt anyone. He had simply never stayed long enough. The first pregnancy was with a girl named Bisi, back when he was 28, and still telling himself he was too young for any of it to matter. He paid for everything, quietly, efficiently, and drove her home afterwards in a silence so complete that she had stopped speaking to him within the month. The second time, 2 years later, with a different woman entirely, he had not even offered to drive. He told himself both times that he was being responsible. A child deserved 2 parents who wanted it, he reasoned, and he did not, and better to be honest about that early than to build a family on a foundation he already knew was hollow. It was in its own cold way, a kind of integrity. It was also, though he did not let himself look at it too closely, a very convenient integrity, the kind that always seemed to arrive exactly when it cost him the least. Michelle was the last one, and she had lasted longer than the others, 11 months, long enough that her toothbrush had a permanent spot in his bathroom, and her sister had started calling him in-law as a joke that both of them silently hoped would stop being a joke. She worked nights on the labor ward at a private hospital off Admiralty Way, the kind of job that teaches a person to read exhaustion and denial in a person's face within seconds because she saw both every shift. She read Peter the same way, eventually. It happened on a Thursday, in his own reception, after she had asked for what she later told him was the last time she intended to ask where the 2 of them were actually going. "I'm not trying to rush you," she said, her voice careful in the way people get careful right before they stop being careful. "I just need to know if this is going somewhere, Peter. I'm 29. I don't have 11 months to give away for free." "I never promised you marriage," he said, and he said it the way he said most things, evenly, reasonably, like a man laying out facts rather than defending himself. Michelle looked at him for a long moment and something in her face closed, quietly, like a shop closes for the night, lights going off one after the other until there was nothing left to see through the glass. That's the problem, she said. You never promise anything. You just take. You take my time, you take my attention, you take whatever I'm willing to give, and you never once tell me what any of it is for. I used to think that meant you are careful. I now know it just means you are a man who doesn't want to be caught owing anybody anything. He wanted to argue. He opened his mouth to argue. Nothing came, because some part of him, the part he rarely let speak, already knew that she was right. She stood, gathered her bag, and paused at the door the way people do when they are giving someone one last chance to say the thing that would change everything. He said nothing. You don't even understand the kind of person you have become, she said, quiet now, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse than if she had shouted. I hope you figure it out before it costs you something you actually wanted to keep. The door closed softly behind him. It did not slam. Peter almost wished it had, because a slammed door is easy to be angry about, and what he felt instead was something with no clean edges to hold on to. He sat alone in his sitting room that night, the television on but unwatched, and did something he had never really done before in the aftermath of a breakup. He did not call anyone, he did not go out. He simply looked around the space he had built for himself, the leather furniture he had chosen alone, the art on the walls he had chosen alone, the empty side of a bed built for two, and understood for the first time with any real clarity that he had everything a successful man was supposed to want and none of the one thing he actually did. Not another woman, not another apartment, not another promotion. A home. Something that would still be standing, still be warm, when the version of himself that impressed strangers at parties finally got tired and went to sleep. That was the night the idea began. Quiet and non-glamorous, the way most turning points actually are. Not a lightning bolt, just a man sitting in a beautiful room that suddenly felt unbearably empty, deciding that whatever he did next, it could not be another version of everything he had already done. If you've ever sat in a room you worked hard to build and still felt completely alone in it, tell me in the comments. Because Peter is about to learn that knowing what's wrong with your life is the easy part. Fixing it honestly is the part almost nobody manages. He gave himself 6 months to think it through properly, and he used every one of them the way a man audits a failing business, without much mercy for himself. What he concluded by the end was simple, and in its own way, damning. He did not need a different city to become a different man, but a different city would make it far easier to convince everyone, including himself, that he already had. A transfer came up 8 months later, a new regional office opening in Port Harcourt, and Peter put his name forward before he had fully thought it through. New city, new office, new church, he decided, almost as an afterthought that would turn out to matter more than anything else. He told his mother it was about career growth. He told his friends it was about a fresh start. He did not tell anyone, because he had not admitted it fully even to himself, that what he actually wanted was an entirely new witness list. People who never saw the other Peter. People who would only ever know the version he intended to become from now on. Disciplined, intentional, the kind of man other people describe without irony as having his life together. He wanted more than anything to marry a woman nothing like the ones he had already ruined. Someone raised properly. Someone who prayed before she made decisions instead of after she regretted them. Modest, warm, capable of building an actual home instead of decorating a beautiful cage. He wanted her partly because he believed she deserved to exist, and partly, though he never once said this out loud, to marry her would be the cleanest possible proof that he had finally changed. He did not yet understand that wanting proof of change and actually changing are two very different journeys, and that a man can spend years walking confidently down the wrong one without ever noticing the difference. Port Harcourt welcomed him the way cities welcome anyone with money and manners, quickly and without asking too many questions. Within 2 months, he had a serviced apartment off Peter Odili Road, a company driver who called him Oga with real respect rather than the performed kind, and a Sunday morning free for the first time in years because his new office did not expect weekend availability. He chose Good News Global Missions, almost by accident, the way people choose churches when they are new to a city and simply follow whichever invitation reaches them first. A colleague from the regional office, warm and persistent in the specific way Nigerian colleagues are when they have decided you need Jesus, would not stop inviting him until he finally agreed just to end the conversation. He expected to attend once, be polite, and quietly disappear the following week. Instead, he found himself back the next Sunday, and the one after that, surprising himself slightly each time. Part of it was the church itself, warm without being performative, structured without being cold. But if he was honest, and he was trying to, with visible effort, to be more honest with himself these days, part of it was simpler than that. He liked who he was allowed to be inside those walls. Nobody there knew about Michelle or the two women who had once cried on the phone, telling him things he had spent years trying to not remember. Inside GGM, he was simply Peter Ajayi, new to the city, polite, unhurried, the kind of man who arrived early and stayed to help stack chairs without being asked. It was in his 4th week that he ran into Joseph. They had studied together at university in Ibadan a decade earlier, close enough back then that Joseph had once slept on Peter's floor for a full semester after a roommate dispute. But life and distance had thinned the friendship down to the occasional birthday message and the kind of "we should link up" that neither party actually follows through with. Joseph had since built a modest but respectable logistics consultancy of his own in Port Harcourt. And when he spotted Peter in the church foyer, his whole face rearranged itself into genuine, startled delight. "Ajayi, Ajayi, what is Lagos big boy doing in my church?" They embraced the way old friends do, with more force than the moment strictly required, and within 20 minutes had exchanged enough information to sketch out a decade neither of them had witnessed. Joseph, it turned out, had a client whose supply chain needs overlapped almost exactly with what Peter's new office handled. And by the time the conversation ended, they had a lunch scheduled that would eventually become a standing one, and a professional relationship neither of them expected, but both of them welcomed. Joseph was the rare kind of friend who had known Peter at his worst and never once weaponized it. He had watched from a comfortable distance as Peter moved through women the way other men move through job offers, weighing them, testing them, discarding the ones that asked for too much of him. He had said something about it once, years ago, half joking, half not. You will marry when you are tired of yourself, not before. Some men need to hit their own wall before they slow down. Sitting across from him now in a Port Harcourt restaurant, watching Peter talk about the church, about wanting to do things differently this time, about a future built on something steadier than attraction, Joseph studied his old friend with the careful attention of a man checking whether a repaired thing has actually been repaired or simply painted over. "I'm happy for you, honestly," Joseph said, after a pause long enough that Peter noticed it. "Just be careful you are not performing change instead of doing it. There's a difference, and from the outside, they look exactly the same for a while." Peter laughed it off the way people laugh off things that land closer than they'd like to admit. "I know the difference," he said. Joseph did not look entirely convinced, but he let it go, the way old friends often do, choosing loyalty over confrontation, filing the doubt away instead of pressing it. It would not be the last time he watched Peter with that same careful, unspoken concern. For now, though, he simply raised his glass, and Peter met it with his own, and the moment passed the way most warnings do, felt but not fully heard. If you've ever had a friend who could see the crack in you before you could see it yourself, and you brushed it off the way Peter just did, comment "I know the difference" below, because trust me, you are not the only one guilty of that particular lie. It was 6 weeks into his membership at GGM that someone in the men's fellowship first mentioned her, the way single church members eventually mention other single church members to each other. Half matchmaking, half gossip, wholly well-meaning. "There are some really good sisters here, you know," Elder Fubara told him one evening after a leaders' meeting, clapping him warmly on the shoulder. "A man like you shouldn't be wasting time. Settle down small. Peter laughed it off, the way he had learned to laugh off most direct questions about his personal life. But the comment stayed with him longer than he expected, working quietly under the surface of his week the way certain sentences do. He noticed her the following Sunday, though noticed was too small a word for what actually happened. She was serving refreshments after the second service, moving between tables with a kind of unhurried efficiency, laughing at something an elderly woman said, crouching to speak eye level with a toddler who had spilled juice down her own dress. She wasn't performing warmth for an audience. Nobody was watching her closely enough for performance to make sense, which was exactly what made Peter watch her more closely than he meant to. She did not see him. That, more than anything else, was what caught him. In Lagos, in his old life, women had noticed him within seconds of entering a room, and he had grown so used to that particular kind of attention that its absence felt almost disorienting. Joy moved through the hall entirely unaware of him, unbothered, complete on her own terms. And something in Peter, some old competitive instinct he thought he had buried along with the rest of his old self, quietly stirred awake. He began asking questions the way men do when they have decided, without quite admitting it to themselves yet, that a question has become important. Who is she? How long has she been coming here? What does she do? Who are her people? The answers, gathered slowly over several weeks from careful roundabout conversations, only deepened his interest. Joy James, newish to the church herself, 5 months in, already respected, already trusted with responsibilities most new members waited years to earn, quiet without being distant, modest in a way that read as natural rather than rehearsed. She served in the welfare unit, visited the sick, and had, according to at least 3 separate people, the kind of heart you don't find in this generation anymore.
She did not seem desperate for male attention, did not linger near the men's section after service the way some newer sisters did not accept invitations to sit with visiting bachelors during fellowship lunches. If anything, she seemed faintly, politely uninterested in the entire subject, and that indifference, more than any deliberate effort on her part, worked on Peter exactly the way water works on stone. Exactly what he had come here looking for. Quiet, prayerful, grounded. A woman who would build something instead of merely decorating it. He told Joseph about her over their next lunch, careful to keep his voice casual, the way men do when they want to sound like they haven't already decided something. "There's a sister at church," he said, stirring his drink longer than it needed. "Joy James. I think I want to get to know her properly." Joseph raised an eyebrow, amused. "Already? You've been in this city, 3 months?" "I'm not rushing anything," Peter said. "I just think for the first time in a long time, I might actually know what I'm looking for." Joseph studied him for a moment, the same careful, checking look from weeks earlier, then softened into a smile and let it go. "Then go carefully," he said. "And Peter, this time, actually mean whatever you say to her." Peter smiled and said he would, and believed it completely as he said it, the way a man always believes the vow he is making for the very first time in earnest, unaware that somewhere else in the same city, a woman he had not yet properly spoken to had already begun writing his name into a plan of her own. If a story has ever made you want to shout at your screen, this is where you start keeping receipts, because everything about to happen next is going to test exactly how well you think you understand these 2 people. Their first real conversation happened by accident, or at least it looked like that to everyone watching, which was exactly how Peter had engineered it. It was after the second service, during the brief window when the welfare unit packed away the extra chairs and the hall thinned out to the people who genuinely had nowhere else pressing to be. Peter had volunteered to help stack chairs 3 Sundays running, a task he had never shown once interest in before Joseph mentioned unprompted that Joy usually stayed back to help with the same job. She was folding tablecloths when he approached, sleeves rolled to the elbow, and she looked at him with the polite, unhurried attention she gave everyone, nothing in her face suggesting she had already memorized the make of his car 3 weeks earlier. "You're new," she said, before he could open with anything rehearsed. "Peter, right? Everyone's been talking about the Lagos brother who actually stays to stack chairs." "Guilty," he said, and something in his own voice surprised him, a looseness he hadn't heard from himself in months. "I figured if I'm going to be part of a place, I should actually be part of it, not just show up and disappear."
"That's rare," she said, folding another cloth, not quite looking at him now. "Most people who say that don't mean it past the first month." "And you?" he asked. "How long have you meant it?" She considered the question longer than it needed, the way she considered most questions that came too close to something real. 5 months. Some days it's easier to mean than others. What makes the hard days hard? She glanced at him then, and for a moment something flickered across her face that he could not quite name, gone before he could study it properly. Rebuilding in life is slower than people think it will be. You do the right things and you keep waiting to feel like a different person, and some mornings you still just feel like you. It was without either of them fully realizing it, the truest sentence either of them had said to the other, and it would be months before Peter understood how literally she had meant it. "I know something about that," he said quietly, and for a moment he almost told her more, almost let the conversation slide toward the parts of Lagos he had come to outrun. He caught himself before it happened, the old instinct for control reasserting itself. But Joy noticed the catch anyway, the half-second where his face had opened and then closed again. And she filed it away, the way she filed away every small useful detail about the men she studied. He is hiding something too, she thought, and felt, disturbingly, a flicker of something closer to comfort than calculation. They finished the chairs together in a silence that neither of them found uncomfortable, and when he offered at the end to walk her to her car, she let him, and their conversation on that short walk stayed carefully, deliberately shallow. Weather, traffic on the east-west road, a mutual appreciation for the choir's new arrangement. Nothing either of them would need to defend later. But something had shifted for both of them in that hall, quiet and small, and entirely real underneath everything neither of them intended to say. And they each drove home that afternoon, turning the other over in their minds far longer than either would have admitted out loud. Peter sat in his car outside his apartment for nearly 10 minutes before going inside, the engine off, the compound quiet around him. He kept returning to one sentence. "Some mornings you still feel like you." He did not know what she had actually meant by it, could not have known, and yet something in the way she said it had landed somewhere he thought he had sealed off completely. He thought of Michelle's voice at his door. "You don't even understand the kind of person you've become." He wondered, sitting in the dark there, whether Joy carried a version of that sentence somewhere inside her too, and felt, for reasons he could not fully name, a pull toward her that had nothing to do with how she looked or how well she would photograph beside him at a wedding. He wanted absurdly to know what her hard days actually cost her. He told himself this was simply what falling in love properly for the first time was supposed to feel like. He went inside eventually, made himself dinner alone, and found that for the first time in longer than he could remember, the silence of his own apartment did not feel quite as heavy as it usually did. If you're enjoying this story already, please give it a like and don't forget to subscribe to this channel, as the plot is about to thicken. To understand what Joy James was building at Good News Global Missions, you have to go back further than the church, back before the modest dresses and the early arrivals, and the careful, deliberate warmth she had learned to wear like a second skin. She had grown up in Aba, the second of 4 children, in a house where money disappeared faster than it arrived, and nobody ever quite explained where it went. By 19, she had learned the hard way what her body could get her, that her circumstances could not. And by 23, she had turned that lesson into something closer to a profession. She was good at it, frighteningly good. She could read a man's insecurities within an hour of meeting him and build, brick by careful brick, exactly the woman he did not know he was looking for. There had been men in Enugu, men in Abuja, one disastrous stretch in Calabar that ended with her changing her phone number twice in the same month after a man named Emeka had shown up outside her rented flat at midnight, screaming her real name into the dark, a name none of his friends or hers had ever heard her use. She had watched him from behind a curtain, perfectly still, and understood in that moment exactly how thin the version of herself she was living inside actually was, how quickly it could tear if the wrong person pulled hard enough in the wrong place. She had left Calabar 3 days later and never once looked back, the way she had trained herself to leave every city that finished asking more of her than she could give. Money collected under promises she never intended to keep. 2 pregnancies she had ended alone, quietly, telling no one. Because the men involved had never been meant to know her real name in the first place, let alone anything else about her. A 3rd pregnancy later, with a man she actually briefly had allowed herself to care about, had ended the same way. Not because she wanted it to, but because the life she was living at the time had no room for a child who would need a mother who existed somewhere else than in a fake profile and a rented address. She did not think about that 3rd one often. When she did, it arrived less like a memory and more like weather, sudden, heavy, gone as quickly as it came, because she had trained herself out of necessity to not sit too long in any one feeling. She was 31 now, and something had shifted in her over the last 2 years that she couldn't entirely explain to herself, let alone to anyone else. A tiredness that had nothing to do with sleep, a hollowness that no amount of collected money ever quite filled. And underneath all of it, quieter than the exhaustion, but far more urgently, a fear she had first heard named out loud by a gynecologist in Abuja 18 months ago in a small consulting room with a slow ceiling fan and a framed medical degree crooked on the wall. Your uterus has been through more than it should at your age, Joy, the doctor told her, not unkindly, reading through a file thickened by procedures Joy had spent years trying to not count. It's scarring mostly. It happens. I'm not telling you it's impossible. I'm telling you that if you intend to carry a child, waiting much longer will make it harder, and there may come a point where it stops being your decision to make. Joy sat very still in that chair, like the way she sat through most difficult things, her face arranging itself into calm before her chest had even caught up. How long, she asked, quietly, before that point? The doctor had been honest with her, the way good doctors are, even when honesty is unwelcome. And the number she gave Joy that afternoon followed her out of that office and into every plan she had made since then. She wanted more than she had ever wanted anything, 1 child. Not many. She wasn't naive about what her body could still manage. Just 1, born into a home stable enough that the child would never once have to learn the things Joy had been forced to learn by 20. A father present enough to matter, a mother who had finally stopped running long enough to raise someone properly. She understood, with the particular clarity of someone who has run out of easy paths, that she did not have years left to find that life by accident. She would have to build it the same way she had built everything else in her adult life, deliberately, with a plan, with a timeline, because waiting on chance had already cost her more than she was willing to keep losing. So, she made a decision, cold and practical in a way she almost admired herself for, sitting alone in her flat with a notebook she would later burn. 3 months to find the right church, learn its people, its social order, its unmarried men, and disappear convincingly into the role of a woman quietly rebuilding her life through God. 3 months after that, to identify, court, and secure a husband. Someone stable, someone kind enough to raise a child well, someone who would never think to ask the questions that would unravel everything. A year at most to be engaged. She chose Good News Global Missions after weeks of quiet research, driving past on Sunday mornings, asking careful questions of hairdressers and shop owners in the area, learning which churches in the city carried the right kind of congregation, professional, respectable, financially comfortable without being so large that a new face would go entirely unnoticed, or so small that a new face would be interrogated too closely. She arrived exactly the way she had planned, hovering uncertainly near the back during her first service, the picture of a woman rebuilding her life in real time. Tamar found her that first day. Tamar was 28, warm in a way that had never once needed to be strategic, the kind of woman who noticed lonely faces in crowded rooms out of pure uncomplicated instinct rather than any plan. She slid into the seat beside Joy during the welcome breakfast without waiting to be invited. First time, Tamar asked, smiling. "Is it that obvious?" Joy said, and the small, embarrassed laugh that followed was disturbingly almost entirely real. She had performed this exact scene in 3 other cities before this one, yet something about Tamar's warmth, unearned and freely given, caught her slightly off guard.
"Only because I have memorized the faces of all the people here," Tamar said, And I have never seen this angelic one in the past. Joy laughed again, fuller this time. You flatter me, she said, blushing. A friend has been asking me to come for weeks. I finally gave in. Then let it be my honor to welcome you and get you settled in, Tama said, and meant it completely, the way she meant most things. Over the following months, Tama did for Joy exactly what Tama did for everyone she loved, without calculation, without an agenda, and without ever once suspecting that the woman she was pouring herself into had chosen this church, this seat, this friendship, the way a hunter chooses ground with good cover. She taught her the informal rules of the congregation, who to greet first, which committees mattered, which gossip to ignore. She invited her for Sunday lunch when Joy claimed to have nowhere else to be. She prayed with her, cried with her, once over nothing in particular, the ordinary overflow of a hard week, and began introducing her to people simply as my sister. A title Joy had not earned and could not, in her more honest moments at 2 a.m., quite bring herself to feel proud of accepting. You've really changed since you joined, Tama told her one evening, months in, as they sat together after a prayer meeting, the hall emptying slowly around them. There's a peace on you now that wasn't there when I first met you. Joy smiled, the practiced warmth arriving a half-second lower than it usually did. I'm trying, she said, and for one uncomfortable, unguarded second, she almost meant it as more than a line. Tama reached over and squeezed her hand, the gesture so unremarkable to her and so unfamiliar to Joy that it nearly undid her composure entirely. Whatever you are rebuilding from, Tama said gently, not fishing, simply offering. I hope you know that you don't have to explain it to be loved here. Some of us just see a person trying, and that's enough for us. Joy nodded and looked away because she could feel something rising in her chest that she had no plan for, no rehearsed line to redirect, and the not knowing what to do with it frightened her more than any lie she had ever had to tell. She had spent a decade learning exactly how to be wanted. She had no training at all in what to do with being simply, freely liked. She did not examine that feeling too closely, for she had learned over years of careful reinvention that examining a feeling too closely was how a plan came apart. If you've ever built a version of yourself just convincing enough to fool people who actually love you, comment, I understand, below, because this story is about to get a lot more complicated for everyone involved, including Joy. It was Tama, eventually, without meaning to, who told her about Peter's interest. They were walking to the car park after a Sunday service, the afternoon heat pressing down hard, when Tama leaned in with the particular energy of someone who has been holding good gossip for exactly as long as she could manage. Guess who's been asking about you? She grinned. Joy kept her face perfectly neutral, the expression she had spent years perfecting for exactly this kind of moment. Who? That new brother, Peter. The Lagos one who works with the shipping company. Sister Ngozi said he's been asking Brother Fubara questions about you for weeks. Tama bumped her shoulder playfully. He's a fine man, Joy. I believe God used extra clay to make him. She laughed and then added, and he seems serious, not the type that's just chasing skirt. Joy laughed it off, practiced with ease, said something dismissive about not being interested in distractions right now, and changed the subject before Tama could press further. She did not let anything show on her face for the rest of the walk to the car, or on the drive home, or in the lobby of her building where she greeted the security man with her usual warm, unhurried smile. It was only once her front door had clicked shut behind her, only once she was alone in the small, carefully unremarkable flat she had rented under her real name for the first time in years, that the smile finally, completely fell away. She stood very still in her sitting room for a long moment, the way a person stands still right before something they've been waiting for finally arrives. Then she crossed to her bedroom, knelt beside the bed, and pulled out an old shoebox from underneath it, worn soft at the corners from being moved city to city. Inside were 2 phones she no longer used, their batteries long dead, and a small notebook filled with names that were not her own, dates, cities, men who had trusted her with things they would never get back. She did not linger on any of it. She had never had the luxury of being sentimental about her own history. She simply sat on the edge of her bed, opened her current phone, and scrolled to the photo she had taken weeks ago without him noticing. Peter, laughing at something during a men's fellowship barbecue, caught mid-motion, unguarded, handsome in the specific way successful men are handsome when they have stopped trying quite so hard to prove it. She looked at that photo for a long time. Finally, she said quietly to the empty room. It was not relief exactly. It was closer to recognition. The particular satisfaction of watching a long, difficult plan finally producing the exact result it had been built for. 5 months of early arrivals and careful modesty and prayers she had learned to perform so well that she sometimes forgot briefly that she was performing them. 5 months of building Tamar's trust, the church's trust, an entire congregation's quiet confidence that Joy James was a woman rebuilding her life through God rather than through calculation. It had worked. He had noticed her exactly the way she needed him to notice her, exactly the way she had positioned herself to be noticed. Quiet, unbothered, unavailable in a certain way that a certain kind of man lean in harder rather than walk away. Peter Ajayi, successful, financially comfortable, new to the city, which meant no complicated local history to untangle. Respected already by the exact congregation she needed on her side. Every single detail she had gathered about him in the last 2 months lined up almost too neatly with everything she had written in a notebook 18 months ago in a doctor's waiting room, back when the word urgent had first attached itself to her future. She allowed herself for one unguarded moment a small, private smile that had nothing rehearsed in it at all. Then, because she had learnt this too, that even victory required discipline, she put the notebook back in its box, slid it back under the bed, and stood to prepare for the week ahead exactly the way a woman rebuilding her life would prepare. Prayer time, scripture reading, a quiet dinner alone with the television on low. The performance had already resumed. It rarely fully stopped anymore. Some nights, lying awake afterward, Joy could no longer entirely locate the line where the performance ended and whatever remained of her real her began. And on the night that thought surfaced too clearly, she pushed it back down the same way she pushed down everything else that threatened to slow her plan. Quickly, efficiently, without looking at it directly for too long. What she could not yet know, what neither of them could yet know, standing on opposite sides of the same congregation with entirely different reasons for wanting each other, is that Peter Ajayi is not simply the perfect target she had calculated him to be. He was by almost every measure that mattered, exactly the kind of man she had once believed did not exist anymore. And somewhere, underneath all of it, some small, unguarded piece of Joy James had already started, quietly, dangerously, to hope that this one might actually be real. Peter Ajayi wants a good woman badly enough to build an entire new life around finding one. Joy James needs a good man badly enough to build a plan around becoming one. Neither of them is lying about what they want. Both of them are about to fall in love with a person that does not yet exist. And somewhere underneath all of it, 2 real people are still waiting to be found. If you already have a feeling about how this ends, don't tell me yet. Just sit with it because I promise you it's more complicated than you can imagine. Type joy in the comments if you want part 2 next. And be honest with me, have you ever caught yourself performing the version of you that you thought someone else needed to see? Like this video if it moved you, subscribe if you are new here, and share it with someone who needs a story like this today. There's an equally beautiful story on your screen. I'm sure you will enjoy it. I'll see you in part 2.